Peace, 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 peace. Say this little declaration before we get started to let y'all know and see why all this stuff we've been talking about has been going on. Let's get to it.
The first Americans' Declaration of Reclamation of Our Identity and Natural Rights. This declaration, dated the accepted and amended July 4, 2019, is in response to the intrusion, genocide, gentrification, indoctrination, and reclassification of the over 100 million strong original peoples of North, Central, South America and adjoining islands over a period of 4 or more centuries. The American Aboriginal peoples described in this declaration are hereby declared the free peoples of the so-called Western Hemisphere and the Americas, meaning clear of obstruction, unrestrained in movement, liberty of action or expression, not holding strictly to rule or form of nations, not subject to foreign rule or to despotism, based on principles of civil liberty, sense of given without cost and free of charge and cost. This declaration do not include the so-called Native Americans, Africans, European, Hindu-European or Asian descendants, only the American Aborigines and mistakenly the American Negro and their descendants. The Anti-Defamation Against the Autochthonous and Aborigine Americans and Natural Rights Act. We, the original and autochthonous peoples of the commonly known area of the Western Hemisphere, aka the Americas, retain all of our rights. Due to the colonization of the land and seas of the area commonly known as the Western Hemisphere to include but not limited to North, Central and South America and the surrounding islands. The original peoples of these lands have been systematically gentrified and misclassified as descendants of black racial groups associated with Africa, i.e. mulatto, Negro, colored, black, and African American. There have been countless wars, crimes and other atrocities committed against our people that need to be redressed and corrected by the U.S. governing body, including but not limited to identity correction, land appropriation that is held in trusts, travel rights, and the return of artifacts and the right to self-govern. Article 1. All so-called black people in the Americas are not descendants of Africa, and this misclassification of our identity, i.e. colored, Negro, Black and African American, is the result of social programming and indoctrination and is not and will not be accepted by the autochthonous people in any manner, whether it be personally, socially, politically or so-called, legally, and any attempt to continue such reckless behavior will be seen as a conspiracy to commit a fraud, a hate crime,
crimes,
and defamation against the original peoples of the Western Hemisphere under international law and the American Constitution. The U.S. corporation, its nation states, affiliates and sponsors have been committing many sorts of crimes against the original or Aborigine people of this land without as much as one warning for the genocide, rape, lynching, displacement and scientific experiments. There are many documented cases. The list of nefarious and criminal activity is almost too long to imagine, and there must be an accounting and remedy for. By our estimates, the greatest majority of so-called white African and European descendants in the U.S. believe that the original or Aborigine people misclassified as black were all brought here on slave ships by their ancestors, not realizing that we were here long before their ancestors existed, and the only reason that they believe the lie is because of the great effort to cover up factual history. Article 2. There are millions of acres of land held in trust by the governing bodies of the Americas that are the birthright of the original or Aborigine people of the land, and we demand that such land be returned in good faith, and without obstruction, harassment, or oversight. Since the original or Aborigine people have been systematically removed and gentrified from our lands by fraudulent practices and intimidation, we feel it would be in the best interest of all involved to give back our land and allow us to live in peace. No exceptions. Article 3. We, as the original or Aborigine peoples of the commonly known as the Western Hemisphere, including but not limited to the Americas and surrounding islands, being of sound mind, body and spirit, reserve all rights to self-govern to the best of our ability without the need for regulation, obstruction, oversight or harassment from the governing bodies. We will operate as a responsible autonomous nation, and all treaties, trade agreements, tariffs, etc. thereof on our land must be approved by us alone. No exceptions. Article 4. We, as the original and Aborigine peoples of what is commonly known as the Western Hemisphere, reserve all rights to travel anywhere, anytime of our choosing within Western Hemisphere without obstruction, harassment, corporate identification, or citizenship of any state-sponsored territories. No
including your
exceptions.
police officers. No
Article 5.
exceptions.
We as the original and Aboriginal peoples have been subject to what is commonly known as paper genocide or paper terrorism by the
Yep.
U.S. state, local governing bodies, and their affiliate Masonic partners slash Order C,
Mm.
policy writers slash
Uh.
enforcers, and other corrupt actors. We will no longer
Actors.
accept your aggressive and in most cases detrimental paper slash computer rulership in all of its
Computer
forms.
rulership.
We are the original free peoples of the land, aka
Originals.
the 1SD Americans. We are not and will not be your citizens nor property in any form. Assaulting and attacking our people on an individual or group basis by anyone, including your citizens, your policy enforcers, or any of your cooperate partners or affiliates, will be considered a hate crime and will be dealt with as such. No
Period.
exceptions. Article 6. All Aborigine man, woman, or child have a natural right to protect themselves in any circumstances, and any attempt to deny this right will be dealt with in the most severe manner possible unless deemed otherwise by the appropriate council. No exceptions. Article 7. No Aborigine man, woman, or child can be enumerated, taxed, or brought into any other judicial or administrative body other than an Aboriginal
They
council.
can't tax you.
No exceptions. Article 8.
Do you guys know that you can go to Walmart and tell them that you are Tatanist and you are Aboriginal and you would like to receive a tax exempt form so that when you go and purchase things there, you're not paying any taxes? That's just a quick tip.
No Aborigine man, woman, or child are part of any so-called sovereign citizen or extremist group or movement of any kind, and any attempt by any individual, group, organization, or governmental agency to connect us to any will be considered a hate crime and defamation. No exceptions.
Period.
Article 9. All Aborigine men, women, and children are free-born living beings and cannot be considered, identified, or treated as property or dead by the U.S. government or any other entities anywhere on any land, air, or body of water. No exceptions. Article 10. No Aborigine men, women, and children can be used as debt or collateral by the U.S.
Okay, by the what? USA. That's what she about to say. The U.S. corporation. That's what she about to say. No one can be used by what? That means what? The birth certificate and social security system that they use entitled under your stock system, the U.S. stock exchange, but your birth certificate number is listed under. You actually have rights to that. Do you know you have rights to that information? All those credits that are assumed with that property that they collect, and that debt that you intrude, that is false. It is falsified. They actually owe you. They owe you millions and millions of dollars, believe it or not.
Government or any other entities anywhere on any land, air, or body of water. No
Period.
exceptions.
Period. Period.
Article
Period.
11. We as the original and Aborigine peoples of the so-called Americas retain all rights to any and all resources that we deem necessary to sustain life, liberty, and the development of our people in any and all regards without obstruction, harassment, or oversight by any entity other than an Aboriginal council. No exceptions.
What's going on, people? I missed y'all. I missed my awesome chat. Y'all think I didn't? My energy is still not all it needs to be right now, guys, but I am here with y'all. I have to check in. Y'all know I'll be live on main radio this evening. I may just play a broadcast depending on how I'm feeling, but I wanted to bring this to y'all. I was thinking about you guys. I love you guys, y'all awesome energy and everything that y'all give to me to help keep me encouraged. Let's get to this video real quick, guys. We got a great little watch party here. We just heard our information as far as like what's going on. We want to make sure these people are understanding everything, the truth and the facts of the matter. I'm typing. I saw, look, sis was showing me a video. I'm looking at this like we got to do something. She said, let's do something on this because listen, look at this. What is this dude even talking about? Did anybody see the guy PMF? He's got a new channel, Mayor. He's talking about the Aboriginal community is built off of homosexuality, all this weird stuff. That is complete, pure slander. He may need to get a lawsuit next. Make sure y'all keeping notes of this stuff, right? He went completely slanderous against the entire community. I think it was so unfair, unruled, and totally unjust. I'm disgusted at the behavior. So at this point in time, when I'm thinking people are like, out of their mind at this point in time, I don't know what's going on, what type of things they have going on in their mind, but there's such an attack on us because we are coming into ourselves and they're trying to keep away from that. Everybody wants to tag on and get a piece of that. All this, my brother, all this other stuff, we got to throw out the window right now. It's time to stick to the facts. Now, when it comes to all these slave trades and the this and that, they keep trying to mix us together with these Africans. The Africans are one people. We are different people. Let's get this straight, okay? The Africans are one people. We are a different freaking people. So when they brought these people over here and they're talking about they came over from the land, they came. They're not talking about us. We were already here. How can you tell somebody that they landed in the land that they were born from? They were conceived in. This is ludicrous. This is absurd. This is such defamatory. Such defamatory. All the things that we keep hearing, all this stuff they keep talking about, all this, ooh, they black, they black, ooh, they white supremacists. Who the hell is a white supremacist? Shit, who the hell got supremacy over me? Not one of them. What? Who black? I'm black in dead in the law. What? I'm not a color. I'm not a crayon. I'm not even black. I'm copper. I'm Reese's. I look like peanut butter. What you talking about? What they talking about? We copper colored. Like we like different colors, light shades, a little darker shades, all that. But that doesn't mean that we're the same ethnic group. This is a total different community of people. We're gonna get into some of that. Let's check this out. We're gonna get into this video, right? Right. We've disclosed all our disclaimers, exposing this information, and yeah, let's get right.
You're listening to the beat of freedom right that echoes across the centuries. Each step on this 26-mile march along a measure of a story that has been suppressed with history you probably never learned in school. The horses trot to the pulse of revolution, response to the daily horrors and dehumanization, then sync to form a present-day representation. The 1811 slave revolt outside New Orleans so wouldn't even recognize its name, the German Coast Uprising.
It's a significant, even before the civil rights movement of the 60s and the 50s, there was a desire for freedom way back in the 1800s.
In 1811, these enslaved rebels had the most radical idea of freedom and emancipation in the United States at that time.
I'm Imayan. Today, we're going to travel back in time so I can tell you why there's this plaque marking the nation's largest slave rebellion and why you've probably never even heard of that uprising. Spoiler alert, it's by design.
Every construction,
This is
deconstruction,
what more than
building.
$1 million looks like. It's costumes, props, planning, and people. In 1712, Louisiana only had 10 Africans. By the start of the Civil War in 1860, more than 330,000 enslaved people. Hundreds of years later, the descendants of the African diaspora are walking alongside each other as a reminder of a historic event. When a slave named Charles Lusane plotted what would become the nation's largest slave revolt 8 years ago, he couldn't have envisioned much money or an artist named Dred Scott.
Okay, I want you guys to pay really close attention. There's these videos aren't very long. I have 3 different videos I want to show you guys, possibly a 4th one on these Cowboys. Because they're very short. I'm just going to group them all into this one thing. We're going to get it out and, just show you a little bit of information and background, so on and so forth. When you're looking at the revolt, they said the ancestors that were brought here, they had some Africans that were brought here. You're going to hear in the disclosure some information. African, the freemen that were here, which are Indians, so on and so forth. Just make sure you're paying attention to that, okay?
Reimagining his rebellion for the 21st.
And I wanted to do this because I'm very asked how the past sets the stage for the present. And I think it's really important for people to learn about this history, but also to think about how we get free
of the idea years ago and has spent the last 6 pulling together this massive reinvention. reenactment. The project features hundreds of reenactors taking on the roles of enslaved people, fighting for their freedom, in a place where you can still see pristine plantations 154 years after the Civil War.
My grandparents came to the United States as slaves. My great grandmother came to the United States as a slave here in Louisiana. And my mother was born on a plantation. So that also has kind of spurred the curiosity in me.
Pastor Donald Ray August Sr. is a son of La Place, Louisiana, and he leads a church that he says sits on the land of former slaves' quarters. He'll be a reenactor in this event, and the rebellion happened in his hometown. He hadn't learned about it until he was.
I don't remember ever hearing anything about the 1811 slave. Oh, very little about something that occurred here. So it's that unspoken, maybe even uncomfortable part of history that many people didn't want to delve into.
Today, the place where enslaved people farmed is these modern day structures that Scots art unfolds in St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, and Orleans parishes. I'm standing on the grounds that helped kill the myth of the happy slave, and it all happened just 1 year before Louisiana gained statehood. It was raining on January 8th, 1811, when Charles Lusane and a group of an estimated 25 slaves attacked the sleeping owner, Manuel Andre, killed public for Black people in New Orleans. Rising was partially inspired by news of Haiti's revolution and created the sovereign island nation in 1804. They dressed up and embodied the spirit of these rebels who was enslaved and fighting for freedom.
This is just like wearing a mask that gives that energy. I can walk until tomorrow. I will not feel tired. I'm telling you.
Ibrahim Masek is one of the people who advised Scott as he organized this project. As the director of research for the Whitney Plantation, studying the transatlantic slave trade, and he says it's his duty to educate about the African diaspora.
Some people don't want you to be educated because, you know, educated people cannot be enslaved.
I met people who had traveled from as close as Mississippi and as far off in this demonstration. There were also many locals. Having the community's involvement was a must for Scott, a person who more than 30 years ago named himself after the man in the Supreme Court's most infamous. In 10 years later, our highest court said no person of African ancestry.
This particular story is also suppressed because from day one, the government story is there's not much to see here. The French colonial society was terrified of the slave rebellion and the possibility that it could have been successful. They also wanted to downplay its significance because they didn't want to enslave people.
Another reason this major event is lesser known may be because of this: Jim Crow.
Jim Crow was another trauma. What trauma just did hide the old trauma.
The segregationist laws across the Deep South made Black people second-class citizens passed in 1964. Unlike 1811, the 2019 version of the rebellion makes it too deliberate in his choice not to visualize the uprising's brutal ending.
That white people did some terrible things during the time times of slavery, that's not news. What is news is that Black people had agency and self-determination and were fighting for freedom.
In reality, some enslaved people were able to escape. Others were captured and returned to bondage. And 45 people, including Charles Delon, were sentenced to death. Their heads were levied from New Orleans to Laplace to serve as a gruesome warning and reminder another slave uprising would not be tolerated.
They were able to formulate a plan and to carry it out, even though it did not end completely successful, but they had the desire to even try. That exemplifies a lot of courage.
Ends in this joy and a direct connection to some of today's biggest issues.
Today, and yet we need to fight in as determined a way.
George Washington. I don't wish to talk about the Boston Tea Party. I don't want to talk about the founding fathers and the writings, sanitized version of American history. Today, we want to talk about slavery, but more importantly, we want to talk about why it is that America makes it a point to write the slave revolts out of her history. Of the Constitution. I don't wish to speak about any of the sanitized version of American history. Today, we want to talk about slavery, but more importantly, want to talk about why it is that America makes it a point to write the slave revolts out of her history. Now, there is a baseball player by the name of Barry Bonds who ended up holding the home run record. Mr. Bonds ended his, but later in his career, it was found that he used steroids during a part of his career. So they put an asterisk by his name to basically say that, yeah, he got all of these home runs, he did in the process. Well, when you look at the United States of America's power, when you look at her wealth, she is the most powerful country on the earth. And you look at the fact that she used our ancestors' free labor and her wealth was built on the backs of African people, then an asterisk can be put by America's name as well. Because just as Barry Bonds, quote unquote, is alleged to have 162 home runs, America cheated her way into her power through the use. Now, it's important that we teach our children that not every slave to be hewers of water, hewers of wood and drawers of water for white people cooperated. Systemic oppression must always be met with systemic resistance. Not only were there slave revolts, there were highly organized slave revolts. Some were nearly successful. Now, they love to out of history. One that I wish that's called the German Coast Uprising. About 40 miles outside of New Orleans, you had what was called the Whitney. And on this plantation, there were several hundred slaves, and it was an area that produced sugarcane. Anybody who knows anything about sugarcane, it was a very back in the 1700s and the 1800s. One of the largest slave rebellions in the history of the United States of America took place. Over 500 slaves armed themselves and they ran up into the slave master's house. They hurt the slave master, killed his son, stole his guns, or took his guns, took his weaponry, and they even took his militia uniforms, and many of them put on the uniforms. So as they marched toward New Orleans, other slaves from other plantations began to join in. And the chant that they shouted are death, freedom or death. Now, there was a man by the name of Charles Deslandes who was the leader of this slave revolt. Mr. Deslandes was a mulatto slave driver. What does this mean? That means that he was a light-skinned brother. And if he was a light-skinned brother, it was because his father was more than a plantation owner. So they trusted Charles Deslandes with their slaves to meet those quotas for the he was plotting. He would organize by night and he would play the role of a slave driver by day. Mr. Deslandes was of Haitian descent. So my assumption is that his mother was a Black Haitian woman, his father, and reasons that they quote unquote trusted him and learning how to read was inspired by the Haitian Revolution that took place only 7 years prior. So he's on a plantation in Louisiana. Remember, there was no Twitter, there was no. So through word of mouth, I'm sure, he heard about what the Haitians did to the French and what the Haitians did to Napoleon in Haiti, which was the most successful slave uprising in history, period, point blank. So it was the inspiration of the Haitian Revolution that got inside this brother. And what he did is he began to electrify other things that the slaves gave them to use. So now they're at 500 and they're moving toward New Orleans. And they're killing any and everything that gets in their way. Well, since the plantation owners in Louisiana could not handle this slave revolt, they called in the federal troops. So the federal troops, which is the government, okay, faced off with the slave. Gunned, they tried to make a maneuver, and then when they turned the Louisiana militia, the white ones, met them. They killed several of our brothers and sisters on the spot. Others were captured and had to stand trial, and many of them were sentenced to death and set before firing squads. At the time of clashing, some of them who were a part of the slave revolt were actually beheaded. And what they did is they took their heads and they spread the heads of these Black brothers and sisters, our ancestors. They set their heads on display throughout the highway for a span of 60 miles. It takes you probably roughly an hour or so to drive for 60 miles. So imagine driving down the highway 60 miles and to your left and your right. All you see along the way are heads of Black people. They did that to send a message to the rest of the slaves that if you plan a revolt down here again, this is the fate that you will meet. Now, this slave revolt was so serious that had it been successful, it would have destabilized the institution of slavery and in Louisiana and through. Why is it that this history is not one that's being told? Why is it that this is being erased from our history? See, they don't mind teaching you about Uncle Tom's Cabin. They don't mind teaching you about the docile slave and Chicken George and those slaves who willingly submitted to the slave master. Every now and then they'll teach you about Kunta Kinte, runaway, something he tried to do by himself, but he was captured. You know, they chopped off his limb. Kunta Kinte story of roots. But they don't want people to be inspired by Charles Lundes. Remember, this man led a 500-person inspiration that he got from Toussaint Overture and those who led the Haitian revolt. Well, if he could be inspired by those in Haiti, he could inspire somebody during this period of time in which we live. This is why they have to erase this from our history. Brothers and sisters, it is history of servitude, slavery. Don't leave out the slaves. We already know before you take that first step that there's a chance that you killed. But remember the chant, it was freedom or death. Freedom, death. That means through this slave revolt, we will either be made free or we will die. So they actually had to make peace with the fact that they would die, because they know that if the story of their revolt is told, that generations would be inspired on into the future. This is why we got to tell the story, brothers and sisters. They have to erase strong black men from the history, because it is the European male's desire to be the only masculine figure in the minds of our children. And even strong black men like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they try to sanitize and weaken their story, their narrative to us, because they always want us to be afraid of them. So to look up some of these rebellions that took place, go and look up the Stono Rebellion of 1739. Teach your children about the New York City conspiracy of 1741. Teach them about Gabriel's conspiracy of 1800, and of course the Nat Turner Rebellion. We must always continue to tell those stories as well. They will always write the slaves that refuse. They want us to be about these slavery. White history can never. Peace.
the American cowboy that we know today is a culmination of West African heritage and the Spaniards, which the West Africans are herdsmen, and they're still herdsmen today. During the those two people put together made the expert. Every third cowboy back in that era was of either Spanish, Indian, or some African descent. That's why they call cowboys. Back a white man will call you a boy if, even if you like 100 years. Why this cowboy come in there? And those are black cowboys, they be out on the range. We go to work. Whatever's supposed to be done out on the range, well, the black cowboy would do it. But Hollywood would have you a rich heritage and history that has been not fairly documented.
Going into Chicago, I saw a sign said, Black Cowboy, the forgotten man of the West. And after doing research,
West African heritage and the Spaniards, which the West Africans are herdsmen, and they're still herdsmen today. During the slave era, they were brought here for their herdsmanship. The herdsmen worked their cattle with dogs, sticks, and rocks, and whistling and sounds. And that combination of those two people put together made the expert horseman. And every third cowboy back in that era was of either Spanish or Indian descent. That's why they call cowboys you
All right, guys, I close it out. I'm gonna start it over so we can get the sound in. Give me a moment. I swear, y'all be so patient with me. I appreciate you guys. Y'all know it ain't me. I'm doing everything I can. Give me a minute. My ear clogged up. I can't even hardly hear out the ear. Sound like an echo. Hold on a second, guys.
But Hollywood would have you believe that there weren't anything but Anglo-Saxon cowboys. It's the rich heritage and history that has been.
I saw a sign that said, Black Cowboy, the forgotten man of the West. And I always thought when I was growing up, I didn't know anybody but the long range Roy Rogers. And kids now are beginning to know the history. But we go to some shows back in the days, they let all the school kids out, and the little black kids would come up to you and feel you and take off running.
From the guys that I've talked to that have told me when there was the Rodeo Cowboys Association, RCA, which is now known as the PRCA, and it was invited in through two of the cowboys that were already there. Two of the white cowboys. That some of the things that were created by blacks, cowboys that worked on ranches that were on actual working ranches, who created rodeos for themselves. Floyd Frank.
Four generations in this family of Franks, boys, rodeo promoters, horse trainers, calf ropers, any of the parts that you would play in a rodeo.
Black Cowboys gone long. Here a year. That was on Easter Sunday. And the rest of the time we was out on the range.
Issue of segregation in rodeos was true. So that made us hard rodeos, midnight rodeos, so to speak. And when we had, I was taught to excel in whatever I tried to do. And I was taught that way by segregation. Whereas segregation said to us in our school, our instructor said back then, you'd have to be twice as good as the white man to make it in this world, which doesn't ordinarily hold true. But it was a concept they would give us, making us the incentive to motivate our thinking personally.
Only thing I wanted to do was be the best. It wasn't trying to beat somebody just because I was black and they were white. It was riding with the best, because at the black rodeos, the guys that rodeo there were just tough as the guys that rodeoed anywhere.
Black man was nothing but a little kid. I remember Rufus Green with some white guys, you know. And if you didn't and that had trucks and trailers, you couldn't go nowhere. And those that was around the country, they had to back their horse in their truck in the ditch like this, yeah, and the horse in the back of the truck to make it to a rodeo.
My daddy's first cousin name was Leo Frank, and he owned a mule that he called Honeysucker that knew how to do all kinds of tricks. And in 1953, he bought a brand new 53 Pontiac 4-door and took the back seats out of it. And he would put that mule in the back seat of that car and haul him all the way up to Oklahoma. And they would hire him as a bullfighter at these rodeos like this. But when they saw that he could ride a bareback horse and he could ride a bull or he could rope like that, they would let him participate. And with a lot of rodeo cowboys. So when you was liked amongst the white guys, you wasn't discriminated against. But if you was just an outsider and they saw that you was a real competitor, that's where the problem came in at.
Rodeo and back in the day, a part of life. Like I say, it wasn't the Cowboys. The prejudice side was the town that you, right here in Texas. And Meredith Dykeman are blacks to riding with whites because they sent a news thing in Alice, Texas, to do a story. He was new. He thought he had. They told me yellow fever. The attention of the RCA. And when they say that time a black man would ride after a rodeo, it had to ride after the rodeo too. And that's what whites on rodeo with. And Meredith Dykeman was the first one that did this, but Willie Thomas was the guy that never got the credit because he came along way before Cowboys. He's the one that really broke the ice for black cowboys.
Well, he started at the A.P. George's ranch when he was rodeoing the feeder, hands. So that's what led him into rodeoing. And the first time he was out in a rodeo, I think he won a third. He never, in a long time, I think he rode about 50 or 60 bulls in a row before he ever got bucked out. 50s, I remember he was in the top 20 in the professional. Back then, they wouldn't draw right. They'd give him the baddest bull. They thought they'd never been rode. And then they started letting him ride during the show. A couple of shows, too, it was so racial, and he had to have, put on his face who he was. So he had to sneak in and ride. And then once he hit, was he rode or got thrown? And so he had to hurry up and get out of it back then. He couldn't.
My dad was a cowboy. My grandfather was a cowboy, and his dad was a cowboy. I started rodeoing at the age of 15. I started going to rodeos, black rodeos. Then I wanted to go to white rodeos. When I was in the 70s, 71, I tried to enter some rodeos, and they wouldn't let me enter some of them because I was black. When you drive 100 miles to a rodeo and they tell you can't ride, and that kind of discourages you. You know, you want to quit.
Segregation, yeah, it was in the late 40s, but in the rodeo, where you really seen segregation still there.
I had a cousin named Tex Williams that kind of a barrier for me. He was able to get into some rodeos that I couldn't. In 68, 69, I couldn't get in.
I was born and raised on the ranch. After I got 13, 14, I started competing in amateur rodeos. Finally, they integrated, and I always wanted to go to one of the high school rodeos. For the people that we worked for, my dad would take the horses and stuff to these rodeos for the kids, and I would always wonder why I couldn't rodeo. And he told me that it just wasn't your time, you know. So it just, I guess about 66, I made my first rodeo in Sinton. I was a little afraid. At every high school rodeo I went to except one, it was only one African-American, and that was me. 60 high school rodeos. And I placed first in all 5. As far as being, I would say, the first black to do this, which I was in high school. I mean, I do know when integration was. There wasn't any black cowboys going to high school final. And up until I rode, not anyone made it.
Local rodeos, and I went professional. I got a permit in the Professional Rodeo Association, and I saw how the Cowboys did, and I had a different avenue. I had going to college to Prairie View. I graduated in 1872, and what I did, I formed an association along with Meredith Dykeman called the All American Rodeo Association. And this was an association where we had rodeo and gave scholarship away, and it quit somewhere around the mid-'80s.
It was just the tone of the environment at that time. It was just those that to be equal to them or feel equal to them. That was just the nature of the beast at that time. These the heart and they're able to do, and you couldn't suppress their skill and their ability and their willingness to achieve championship and to develop champions even in us. So they kept on driving no matter what.
They wanted to be a cowboy, and that's what they wanted to do, and they knew if they persevered, they would eventually be champions.
A lot of black cowboys never seen would win a world championship. And in 1982, Charlie Sampson was the first professional black bull rider, and Fred Whitfield, he won 6 or 7 titles and an all-around title. So it wasn't all in vain.
We learned from those guys tenacity of our fathers and our forefathers of overcoming whatever adversity we had to still be championship. Anybody hold us back, and champions in whatever you do, whether it's a cowboy or not. When you see these type of men and these men who endure this type of discrimination and people trying to hold them back, there's no excuse for us not to achieve in anything we do.
So you got to want to do anything to do it. And if you want to do it and be good at it, you can do it.
Dear Heavenly Father,
Yes, Lord.
we are Paul in the midst of this occasion.
Oh, yes.
Giving honor and thanks to thee for making it possible.
Oh, yes.
You're the guided light.
Yes.
And you can make it shine in the very,
yes.
very darkness of night.
Yes.
You can do, dear God, best your favors.
Yes.
Not to break a barrier in a time event.
Yes.
We ask that you not draw us a horse.
Yes.
A central norm.
Yes.
While we might ride a never been rode.
Yes.
But give us the strength.
Oh yeah.
To perform.
Yes.
In the best of our ability.
Yes.
And we make the last ride.
Yes.
Oh yes, Lord, let it be ride in your kingdom. These blessings we ask in your name. Let us all say amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
This morning when I woke, I felt it. And looking toward I filled the sky.
It's a cold autumn night sometime around the late 1870s. Somewhere in the western district of Arkansas, the hanging over your head, issued by none other than the infamous federal judge Isaac Parker, known as the dispatched his most effective and relentless enforcer to bring you back to justice, a lawman so feared and respected that he haunts in their nightmares. How would you picture him in your head? Well, you're probably thinking about your typical cowboy, complete with Stetson hat, a six-shooter, and a starship badge popularized by Hollywood. Tall like Gary Cooper, strong like John Wayne, rugged like Clint Eastwood, and full of grit like Jeff Bridges. Well, you got it all right, except for one detail. Your nemesis is a freed former African-American slave, Bass Reeves, the first black deputy U.S. Marshal to ride for justice west of the Mississippi River. Today, his life. Bass Reeves was born into slavery on the 16th of July, 1838, in Crawford County, Arkansas. Bass got his first name from his grandfather, Bass Washington, and his surname from Bass Reeves and his family. In 1846, his master moved to Grayson County, Texas, where young Bass first worked as a stable hand and a blacksmith's apprentice before becoming a manservant to the son of his master, George Reeves. This George Reeves was quite a high-profile character, being a Confederate colonel during the American Civil War. Bass did actually follow him everywhere, joining him in several battles. Bass himself claimed to have fought at Pea Ridge in March 1862, Chickamauga in 1760, Missionary Ridge in November of 1863. Now we will see later on how Bass Reeves achieved some outstanding accomplishments in his later life, and yet the man must have felt the need to fluff up his military record. Brady, Bass did fight at the Pea Ridge battle, which, by the way, was a major Confederate defeat, but he disputes Bass's participation in the other battles. You see, sometime after Pea Ridge, Bass had a disagreement over a game of cards with Colonel King. Any means he had available at that time, and that was a punch to the colonel. It was the beginning of Bass Reeves' legend. Of death by lynching, Bass fled north to Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, not far from Pea Ridge. During this period, he lived with the Cherokee, Seminole, and Creek Indians, becoming fluent in the language as well as learning languages spoken by other tribes. He did not entirely escape from the war, though. Historian Dr. Art Burton suggests that Bass may have become a Unionist sergeant after joining a unit made up of former slaves and Native Americans fighting against tribes allied to the Confederacy. The Emancipation Declaration was issued in 1863, followed at the end of the Civil War by the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which definitively abolished slavery. Bass was now a free man, and he was able to settle in Phoenician. It was here that he met and married his first wife, Nellie Jenny from Texas, with whom he had children, 5 boys and 5 girls. Reeves and his family farmed in Van Buren until 1875. So what was life like for an African-American family in the southern states at that time? Well, as you might imagine, it was not very easy. The early post-war years were promising for African-Americans. The Federal Freedmen's Bureau ensured that by 1870, more than 240,000 pupils were enrolled in more than 4,000 schools. Then the 15th, all males the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Within a few years, every southern state legislature had African-American members, and 11 African-Americans had been elected to U.S. Congress. Unfortunately, when federal troops left the occupied southern states, former Confederates returned to power and rescinded many of the rights gained by African-Americans. They were forbidden to vote, to testify in court against European Americans, to enroll in school, to travel freely, to disobey an order, or to leave a job without permission. In many states, any African-American traits of social segregation came into being as European and African Americans were forced into separate accommodations to an extent even greater than during slavery. This harsh social order became infamous as the Jim Crow laws, enforced by new vigilante organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, which terrorized African Americans and tortured and killed those who violated the new codes. Lynching, it became commonplace. The District of Kansas must have been a dangerous and precarious world for Bass and his family. However, Reeves had a very valuable talent. You see, the nearby Indian Territory was the favorite hiding place for hundreds of desperados, bandits on the run from federal and local lawmen. It was an expansive land, so lethal and lawless that historian Art Burton compared it to Afghanistan post-insurgency. You could lose your life over your hat, your horse, your gun, your woman, any damn thing. Well, Bass Reeves was literally at home in this hell on earth, their language. Soon, this talent was recognized and was hired as a guide by the U.S. Marshal stationed in Van Buren when territory. So those of you who are not watching, are these marshals? Who are you talking about, Simon? Well, the Office of the U.S. Marshals was created in 1789 by the ever American Congress. Their function was to support the federal courts within their judicial districts and to kill the president. In practical terms, this included some pretty badass and life-threatening activities, such as paying expenses to the court clerks, hiring court janitors, refilling water pitchers for judges, attorneys, and jurors. But don't worry, the life it wasn't all thrills. In fact, the U.S. Marshals were given the power to appoint deputies who had the power to carry out the most mundane and clerical of tasks, like apprehending murderous fugitives, escorting prisoners across dangerous territories, carrying out arrest warrants, arresting criminals on the spot, and supporting local law enforcement in their normal duties. But I might have got those lists in the wrong order. Either way, the point is the US Marshals had and still have huge and varied responsibilities, and were often in the front line of the war against crime in the lawless lands west of the Mississippi River. This is especially true because at the time they and the private detectives from Pinkerton were the only law enforcement agencies with federal jurisdiction. Now let's hear from Burton again. The Indian Territory was where the majority of deputy U.S. Marshals had been killed in the line of duty in the history of the Marshal Service. You're looking at a little over 200 have been killed in the line of duty to this date right now. Over 130 were killed in the territory. You also had Indian policemen getting killed. You had town municipal policemen getting killed. It had to be the greatest between law in the history of the United States of America. In 1875, former U.S. Congressman Isaac Parker was appointed federal judge for the Indian Territory. Parker became known as the hanging judge for his propensity to hand out harsh death sentences. He was a harsh man, but apparently that's what West Arkansas and the Indian Territory needed. Park appointed James F. Fagan as U.S. Marshal, directing him to hire 200 U.S. Marshal deputies. Fagan had heard about Reeves and how he knew the Indian Territory and could speak several Indian languages, and he decided to deputize him. It is tempting to celebrate Bass Reeves as the first African-American U.S. deputy, but he was not. He may have been the first, or maybe he was just one of the first west of the Mississippi. Our expert, Dr. Burton, in fact, claims that the presence of black lawmen and soldiers in the Old West has been growing by historians and popular culture alike. If we look at the real Western frontier, you also found blacks who were in law enforcement across the West, in Montana and Colorado and New Mexico. 20% of the military on the Western frontier were African Americans. Further, the majority of the federal workers for the Fort Smith Court, Arkansas, in 1878 were African Americans. So why do we celebrate and remember Bass Reeves today? Not only because he was one of those who had overcome barriers imposed by prejudice, by segregation, and sometimes even by law, which today would count as crimes against humanity. Not only that, but also because he was simply one of the best damn that lived. Period. Certainly looked the part. 2 or 188 centimeters, sporting an epic handlebar moustache, black Stetson hat, and dark polished boots. He was an accomplished horseman and marksman due to his hunting and military experience, and life as a blacksmith and farmer had been incredibly strong. But Reeves, he was not all brawn. Even though he remained illiterate his whole life, Deputy Reeves had a prodigious memory, so he just learned by heart the warrants and court orders as he received them. He could also be very cunning, preferring to use guile instead of guns in many occasions, and had reportedly impressive detective skills. His track record speaks for itself. Bass Reeves about 3,000 arrests. That's an average of 94 per year. He also shot and killed 14 criminals in self-defense, but was never seriously wounded, despite his hat being shot off 2 separate times. But let's take a closer look at some of his most famous adventures. In September 1884, Deputy Reeves was in the Indian Territory with arrest warrant in hand for 2 rustlers, Frank Buck and John Bruner. 2 local men had volunteered to guide him, but unbeknownst to him, these guys were actually Buck and Bruner. Grabbed Bruner's gun and pulled his own 6-shooter. Behind his back, Buck was getting ready to shoot. Quick as a flash, and still holding Bruner's weapon, Reeves turned around and shot Buck dead. In another case, Reeves had to face the famous 3 outlaw brothers, the Brunters. But this time, it seemed like the criminals had the upper hand. They ambushed Reeves and held him at gunpoint, taunting the man who was already known as the indomitable Marshal. Fearless as usual, Reeves calmly asked for the date. When the brothers asked why, Reeves explained that their arrest papers needed to be dated. After all, they were coming with him, dead or alive. In a scene worthy of a Hollywood action movie, the outlaws burst out laughing. Reeves took advantage of their distraction, turning away from the barrel of the gun aimed at him. The other 2 brothers aimed at him as well, but Reeves was quicker on the draw and shot both dead. As for the 3rd brother, someone disarmed him and cracked his skull with his own gun. But as I mentioned earlier, Reeves he could also be slammed. In the pursuit of 2 outlaws in the Red River Valley, Reeves and his colleague thought the criminals were refuge at their mother's cabin. Approaching Old Mama's house on the open terrain was too dangerous, but Reeves had a plan. He dirtied up his clothes, ditched his polished boots for an old pair of shoes, and shot 3 holes in his hat. He then walked 28 miles to the cabin and knocked on the door. When Mum opened the door, Reeves impersonated an outlaw on the run from the marshals, who was thirsty, hungry, and tired. Of course, the old lady sympathized and took him in. Later that night, her boys showed up, and she whistled to them, indicating that the coast was clear. When the other marshals arrived the next morning, they found Reeves keeping watch on the 2 brothers, still asleep and safely handcuffed. Without firing a shot nor risking anyone's life, Reeves had scored a resounding victory, collecting a $5,000 reward, which is about $121,000 in today's money. And yet, despite Reeves's undisputed effectiveness, some white lawmen still believed that a black man was beneath them. Judge Brady, Reeves's great-grandnephew, reports one incident in which a white police officer threatened to shoot the marshal with his gun for ordering some white federal prisoners around. In other words, being guilty of doing his job. Only the intervention of a senior marshal avoided a shootout amongst fellow law. Same grew with each arrest, fueled by local newspapers in search of heroes to celebrate. His reputation as a fearless, indomitable, incorruptible lawman eventually became a enough to prevent criminals from escaping justice. Just listen to this story from the summer of 1903. One night, he had doused her in oil and set her on fire, but while on the run, he had a dream, or rather a nightmare. According to the July 16th, 1903 edition of the Daily Admirette, McIntosh says he dreamed Reeves came upon him in the brush, and when he jumped up to run, the deputy shot and killed him. When he awoke and realized that it was only a dream, he decided to come to town and give up immediately. Bass Reeves' steely dedication to upholding the law did not hold him back from his friends or family either. He famously arrested the minister that had baptized him on charges of selling illegal liquor, and even more famously, he went after his own son, Benny. Here is the Daily Admirette again. A warrant for the arrest of the younger Reeves for murdering his wife has been issued, and Marshal Bennett said that perhaps another deputy had better be sent to serve it. Old Bass was in the room and quietly said, "Give me the writ." He went out, arrested his son, convicted him, and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Benny Reeves was eventually freed from his life sentence for being a model prisoner and reportedly never committed another crime again. Now, so far, we've looked at the highlights of his career, but in his tenure as marshal, there was at least one shadow. In April of 1884, Reeves had in fact been of his camp cook, William Leach. An initial inquest ruled that this had been an accident and no charges were filed against Deputy Reeves. But 2 years later, a former Confederate took over the U.S. Attorney's office and the sentence was overruled. Bass was now charged with murder in jail for 3 months. Reeves and others testified that the shooting was accidental, with his rifle going off while Reeves was trying to clear a faulty cartridge from the chamber with a knife. He was eventually acquitted, but the legal expenses left him financially ruined as he was forced to sell his home. According to Judge Jim Spears, a member of the Bass Reeves Legacy Initiative, the charges against the deputy marshal were politically and racially motivated. However, Reeves' strength of character is shown by the fact that he decided to continue his career after his acquittal. And so the lone marshal rode again and became the legend that we know of today. For some time, he was believed to be the inspiration behind the character of the Lone Ranger, a masked lawman in the Old West, first appearing in a 1930s radio show, then in But I'm afraid to tell you that this is actually a myth that can be safely debunked, as it was circulated by none other than our friend Dr. Art Burton, who hinted at this connection without any real proof. The Lone Ranger was actually inspired by Mix, a star of early Western films. Rather than saying that Bass inspired some masked white dude in a lame 2013 movie, doesn't he deserve a proper, well-written in the early 20th century by settlers. By 1907, Kansas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma had officially become states within the Union, and the Indian Territory was now aged 68, and it was time for him to leave the U.S. Marshals. But he did not retire just yet, preferring to serve for a further 2 years as a Reeves finally did retire due to a kidney condition called Bright's disease. He died a year later on January the 12th, 1910, being remembered in his obituary as a universally respected U.S. Deputy Marshal who was absolutely fearless and had no known master but duty. So I really hope you found that video interesting. Please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. We got brand new videos 4 times a week, so subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.
Very interesting, right? Very, very interesting. So when it comes to a lot of the things they tell us, when it if you guys were listening to of those stories, they told us a little bit about, they kept saying Indians and the Africans, you know, so on and so forth. So therefore that tells us exactly you know, who is who. We were already here. They every time they talked about things, even then with that Dred Scott, it told you what? It said that any Africans cannot be considered a citizen. Africans, it said Africans. We were not Africans. So at this time, they tried to change it, obviously, to say that we are, you know, African American. Oh, we came from here. This is the blending of that story. The story just sounds so absurd. I mean, just think of it. But I'm not going to get into that right now because you guys know I want to play this back about it, main radio, and we'll have a program set for that as well. All right, guys, we get it going. This is too much for me, guys. When I say I'm getting annoyed right now, I'm gonna try this one more time. If not, we're gonna end. So give me a moment.
Last week, President Obama mentioned the role of slaves in building one specific Thomas Jefferson's plantation estate in Charlottesville, Virginia. Obama was touring the home of America's third president with French leader Francois Hollande. Is what Obama had to say about Monticello.
This House also represents the complicated history of the United States. We spares magnificent structure, and the Jefferson, after the Declaration of Independence, had to slavery, and it's a reminder for both of us that we are going to continue to fight on behalf of the rights of all peoples, something that I know France has always been committed to, and we are committed to as well.
President Obama speaking last week during French President Francois Hollande's visit to the U.S. We're joined now by Clarence Lusane, who's documented the racial history of Washington, D.C. and the presidency. The article is missing from President's Day. The people they enslaved. Clarence Lusane writes, quote, more than 1 in 4 U.S. presidents were involved in human trafficking and slavery. These presidents bought, sold, and bred enslaved people for profit. Of the 12 presidents who were in this, he writes. Clarence Lusane is author of The Black History of the White House, a member of the Commission on African American Affairs, also professor at American University.
building in the U.S., the one that represents the country to the world, the White House, also was a place where slavery existed. None of that has been publicly acknowledged. There's over 1 million people who visit the White House every year, who go on tours, who come for meetings, and you can go through that building and never have a sense of that important history. And that's critical because I think President's Day should be a period of critical reflection, not some kind of blind celebration, but it should be one where we really try to get a better sense of the country's history. And part of that history, part of what I think resonates even to this day, is that significantly before the Civil War, nearly every US president was a slave owner, which meant that they were compromised on the issue of slavery, and that had repercussions that redounded through history. So it's really critical, I think, that we have that acknowledgement because we grow up, we go to school, we have history classes, and none of that history is told to us.
So give us a Black history of U.S. presidents, as you call it.
What's that as the prism look at this longer history that basically led up to President Obama? One of the things that I find that's missing in that history is the voices of people, particularly African enslaved, during that long history. And that was critical because when you think about George Washington, the early presidents,
Okay, guys, I'm getting so frustrated. Let me put the link in here. I want you guys to watch this. It's a very, very good video, right? A lot of information I want to kind of discuss and go over, but you guys can, pretty much get the gist of it when you watch it yourself. So just check this video out. And yeah, I need to take a break because I have my show in like 50 minutes. So make sure you guys are tuning in at 6 o'clock for the main radio, 6 Central Standard Time. And I will talk with you guys again. Peace and blessings.